All right, well, good morning, everyone. So for those who don't know me, my name is Zach McCulloch, and I'm the Vice President of the West Michigan chapter, filling in for Chris Skolton as he cannot be here this morning. I just want to thank you all for attending and quickly just want to touch on our meeting next month. So it will be exactly a month from today on March 4th at 8:30 at F&Z in Grand Rapids. The topic will be breaking the cycle, preventing serious injuries and fatalities through human and organizational performance. We will be hearing from our very own Nick Miedema, who is our current treasurer and is the senior EHS manager at Perigo, as well as his colleague John Holmes, who is an EHS associate analyst also with Perigo. So I hope to see you all there next month. The invite should be going out here in the next couple of days. With that being said, this morning we have a little bit of a different topic than we usually do. We're going to be focusing on the E of EHS. So I would like to introduce you all to Sarah Meyer, who will be our presenter this morning. She is an associate partner at Environmental Resources Management, also known as ERM. She is ERM's National Stormwater Program Director and is a subject matter expert in environmental reporting, including SARA 311, SARA 312 and Tier 2, SARA 313 and Form R, as well as annual air emissions. So she has led enterprise level Tier 2 reports projects each year since 2017. The total number of Tier 2 reports submitted across 45 states, ranging from 150 reports in 2017 to 800 reports in 2024. So that's a good amount of reports. So this morning we will be focusing on Tier 2 reporting that's required under EPA's SARA 312 and is focused on material storage. While SARA's 312 is a federal program, each state gets their own set of rules, from Tier 2 reporting tools to thresholds and due dates, making their own extremely hazardous substances. So this session will walk us through an overview of Tier 2 reporting, specifics of Michigan Tier 2 reporting systems and processes, and it includes an overview of other states, which can be helpful if you have responsibilities that extend beyond Michigan. And Michigan's Tier 2 due date is March 1st. I'm sure we'll hear about that more in the presentation. But in addition to Tier 2, this presentation will include information about Michigan air emissions reporting, which is completed through MiEnviro, and that is Michigan. That report is due March 15th. So with that being said, I would like to turn it over to Sarah. If you want to go ahead and share your screen. If you have any questions, you can go ahead and type them in the chat, and we will have a short Q&A following the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Zach. And to confirm, you can see my screen?
Yep, looks great.
Wonderful. Thanks. So hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Meyer. I do work for ERM. I've been here for 18 years. I work alongside Katie Dratz, who is on this call and a member of this group. Thanks for asking me here. I am glad to talk about Tier 2 and air emissions reporting, and let's just jump right in. Okay, my slides. There we go. Okay, so we'll talk about the EPRA stuff first. I'm going to talk about 302, 311, and 312 because they kind of all tie together along with the Tier 2 report. They kind of, bridge into that. We'll talk about some exemptions that are important, reporting rules and tips, platforms and fees, jurisdiction review, and penalties and fines. And this is going to be, I will include Michigan, but I do want to cover other states. As Zach mentioned, Michigan is one of many states who get to set their own rules. So Tier 2 is a federal program, but it is set at the state level. So we'll talk about that, differences there. And then we'll get into air emissions reporting. Okay, so Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act, that's EPCRA. This was passed in 1996, but it came out of an incident that happened in Bhopal, India. A Union Carbide facility there had an accidental release of methyl isocyanate, which resulted in a lot of injuries and deaths. And the world was outraged. That was in 1984, and it really opened people's eyes to, how bad sometimes things can happen when you don't know what you are by, or when emergency planners don't know what they're walking into. And then the hubbub kind of died down and people moved on, as it were. But then the following year, that same company had a release of this same material at a facility in West Virginia. which prompted Congress to say, look, people have a right to know what they live by, and emergency planners really need to know what they're walking into when they go into a facility. So key provisions: emergency planning is SARA 302, emergency notification is 304. We'll dig into these more in a bit. Initial notification: when you have something new on site, you need to let everybody know about it, let the emergency planning teams know. Tier 2 reporting, and then toxic release inventory, which is also known as Form R reporting, is SARA 313, and that's the Community Right to Know Act. I'm not going to talk about that today. So what we'll focus on today is the Tier 2 reporting and other things that lead up to that, because those have the deadline is approaching, March 1. So Section 302, emergency planning. Who is subject? Any facility that has an extremely hazardous substance present in an amount equal to or greater than the threshold planning quantity. We'll look at the EPA list of lists in just a minute. But what you have to do if you have this material, you have to inform the local emergency planning committee and the local fire department, and they need to have a plan. That's the thing for 302. You have to tell them so they can create a plan. Sometimes the plan is done at the county level. Sometimes it's done at the fire department level. Sometimes they may ask you to do it. In some states, you'll get a notification. Wisconsin is one of those states. You get a notification that says you've crossed the threshold for 302. Here's our form. Fill it out so we know what to do if there's an emergency. So looking now at EPA's list of lists, and you can see here, Section 302, EHS, that's extremely hazardous substance, and then threshold planning quantity, okay? 302, let's look at an example. So in that previous picture, there was a 250-gallon tote. Well, there was a vat, kind of a tank of sulfuric acid. Let's say it's 250-gallon tote. Is reporting needed? So we look at list of lists, and sulfuric acid is on the list on the bottom there. How many, what do we have on site in pounds? Because 302 is all in pounds. So we've got 250 gallons, it's 15 pounds per gallon, that's 3750 pounds. Is that more than the 302 threshold planning quantity? Yes, it is. So then reporting is required. Okay, so that's 302. We'll talk about 304 in just a minute, but 311 comes, it doesn't come first on the chart, but it does come first in what you need to do for the facility. If you have new storage of any hazardous substances of 10,000 pounds or more. Now, what's a hazardous substance? This is a little bit open for debate. The way the regulation reads is if OSHA requires you to have a safety data sheet, then that is considered a hazardous chemical. But I mean, I've seen safety data sheets for water, and water is not a hazardous chemical. So it's kind of a little bit up to you to decide what you're bringing in on this. I have had clients who have said, look, oil is not hazardous. We're not going to include oil on our tier 2 reporting or initial notification. But we do have the state of Florida's, their DEP has issued guidance that, in fact, oils do need to be included because they do have hazards, right? They have aspiration hazards. There's some other things that are listed on the safety data sheet. So be careful when you're making a decision to exclude something from reporting. Keep in mind the community that you're reporting into, okay? And we'll talk more about that in a bit. And then extremely hazardous substances, which we saw in SARA, that list of lists. That's 500 pounds or the threshold planning quantity. Remember, the threshold planning quantity for sulfuric acid was 1,000 pounds. But if you, the initial notification and the tier 2 report have that lower threshold, it is 500 pounds or the TPQ, whichever is lower, okay? This is a one-time submittal, kind of. You should make the initial notification when you first move into a facility, but then also anytime you have something new that crosses the threshold. Some companies are very conscientious about this. Some companies are not. I have not seen companies get in trouble as long as nothing happens, but you're kind of rolling the dice there. If there's an emergency and emergency responders come and they find something they weren't expecting, then you could expect that there would be some repercussions for having not filed that SARA 311 initial notification. So when you submit this, you have to submit the safety data sheet or a list of chemicals that are on site above the reporting threshold, and that goes to the State Emergency Response Commission, or the SERC. In some states, Michigan, Ohio, that is the environmental group, so Ohio EPA or EGLE in Michigan. But in some states, it's like I think New Jersey, it's the Department of Labor. So it just depends on who owns the ERC there. Also then the Local Emergency Planning Commission, or LEPC, and the local fire department. New facilities have 3 months, and you can see that that's in red. Wherever you see red text in here, that is a state variation. That's something the states can control. And every time you see that red text, think in your mind, oh, well, I wonder, I might know what Michigan's is, but if I have responsibility for a facility in Nebraska, for example, what does Nebraska require? Okay. So new facilities have 3 months after becoming subject to the OSHA regulations to submit their initial notification. Note here, some states have a more extensive list of extremely hazardous substances. New Jersey has their own list. I'm not sure why they decided the EPA list wasn't good enough, but they made their own full list. There's a lot of continuity between the two lists, but there are some additional things on New Jersey's list. As you might expect, California has a very different list, and they include things like nicotine, which comes into importance, I guess, when you're filing a report there, because you may need to include anything that has nicotine. So if you are, overseeing a distribution facility and they sell vape cartridges, there's nicotine in those, so you have to report them. If cigarettes have to be reported, nicotine patches, anything that's on the list has to be reported there. Okay, next slide. Tier 2 reporting. So looking at 312 now. Again, same facilities are subject. If you have hazardous chemicals above 10,000 pounds or extremely hazardous chemicals above 500 pounds, or that TPQ, whichever is lower. When you're getting ready for this, kind of ask yourself, if I were a firefighter and I needed to go onto this site, what would I want to know? We have a client who does glass treatments, and they asked if they needed to include their glass. It's a solid state, right? It doesn't have a lot of hazards on its SDS. But if you were a firefighter and you walked into a facility with 200,000 pounds worth of 10-foot by 10-foot glass sheets, would you want to know? We mentioned that to the client, asked them that question, and they said yes, they would. So we did make the decision then to actually report. Okay, so then what's required under the Tier 2 report? You have to submit the Tier 2 report for the previous calendar year by March 1. This, again, something that can change. North Dakota's requirement is February 28. Which is an issue in the leap year, right? It's not March 1, it's the day before, or maybe 2 days before. In Missouri, up until last year, their deadline was midnight on March 1, and they charged you a fee, a late fee of $250 if you filed on March 1 or later. So the reason that changed is not that they changed the date, but that their regulation for that fee, the late fee, expired. So be aware of what the state requirements are. The report has to include contact information, details of the chemicals that are on site above the reporting thresholds. And the point of this is emergency responders' right to know, and emergency planners need to know. Okay, I'm giving you some rules of thumb here, but remember, the requirement is to do the evaluation and then report if you exceed the reporting threshold. The state, EGLE in Michigan, the LEPC, or the fire department can ask for your Tier 2 evaluation if you didn't submit a report. And they can ask for your evaluation if you did submit a report and they want to know why you didn't include something. So you might have somebody. Sometimes we see sites that will have reported oils in the past. Now they make a decision, we're not going to include the oils because they're not hazardous. And then the state reaches out and says, hey, you had 50,000 pounds of oil on site last year. Did you remove all of that? Because if you didn't, it needs to be on the report. Another thing that can happen is that the fire marshal might come to your building just to do, you know, their routine inspection, and they may ask questions. Remember, they're part of that fire department. So if they ask questions, they're going to be asking about your tier 2 report as well. So these rules of thumb: are there 4 or more pallets or totes of a chemical? Usually you're looking at about 2,500 pounds each, and then that would be 10,000 pounds. Are there more than 20 drums? You can see the math there. Is there a bulk tank storage? Make sure you're considering liquids, but make sure you're also considering gas. If you have a very large nitrogen, you know, AST outside, nitrogen tank outside, because maybe you're doing a lot of welding. How much is in that nitrogen tank? That can actually be kind of tricky to find out, and you may need to go to your nitrogen supplier, compressed gas supplier in that case. But compressed gases definitely have to be included in the evaluation because they do have hazards associated with them. Okay, then looking at forklift batteries. Remember that sulfuric acid has a 500-pound threshold. Sulfuric acid can be 5 to 30% of the battery weight. Okay? It doesn't take a lot of batteries to get to that 500 pounds. So a fork truck battery, maybe let's say it's 2,800 pounds. You've got 2 of them, you're probably already exceeding that 500-pound threshold. I have seen companies get fined. There was a coffee roaster and a distributor in Washington State. I don't know the name of the company, but we can probably make some guesses. That got fined a lot of several, like tens of thousands of dollars because they did not include fork truck batteries in their tier 2 reports across their facilities. You can see fuel oil there. That's about 1,500 gallons is about 10,000 pounds. And remember, some refrigerants, including ammonia, have a much lower threshold. Again, 500 pounds for that. Looking at some exemptions. There are 5 exemptions under Section 311 and 312, so initial notification and tier 2 report. Any food additive, color additive, drug, or cosmetic that's regulated by the FDA does not need to be included in your tier 2 report. Any substance present as a solid in a manufactured item to the extent that exposure to the substance does not occur under normal conditions of use. An example of this is plastic pellets. We have a lot of clients who use plastic pellets. And in some cases, they're like, no, it's a solid substance. There's no hazard from normal conditions of use. We're not going to report it. But we actually have a lot of our clients who do report the plastic pellets. In Michigan, there's no fee for what you're reporting, so it doesn't matter if you have an extra line item. And a lot of states are that way, not all of them. We'll talk about fees in a bit. But again, asking yourself, if I were the fire department, would I want to know that this facility has 5 silos of 1 million pounds each of plastic pellet? Probably I would. So that's, you know, it gets back to that discretion. You get to make the decision, but you have to be able to back it up. So number 3, then, any substance to the extent it is used for personal, family, or household purposes, or is in the same form and concentration as a product package for distribution and use by general public. This is the big one. It exempts truck batteries or car batteries, right? I could buy that at AutoZone or whatever. So I don't have to include that if my floor sweeper is powered by 8 car batteries. I don't need to include those in the report. Another place where that comes into practice, we saw this a lot during COVID. If you have a gallon jug of hand sanitizer, you know, it probably could have been bought at Walmart, right? They were almost ubiquitous. But some companies had 330-gallon totes of hand sanitizer, not something that we could have purchased as the general public. So that did need to be included. An interesting thing about that with the COVID and hand sanitizer, we actually called a lot of state agencies and asked, you know, how long is on site? What's your definition of that? The longest time frame was overnight. So if a company had used a facility as a distribution point, so they brought in like 10 totes of hand sanitizer and then shipped them out from there to other facilities. If they were on site overnight, they had to be on the tier 2 report, and we had to file an initial notification. The shortest time frame was 5 minutes. So the longest time frame was overnight. If you've got something on site overnight and it's more than 10,000 pounds as a hazardous substance or above the reporting quantity for the, for an extremely hazardous substance, you have to let them know. And in some states, it was 5 minutes. Michigan was kind of in the middle. They were like, I don't know, maybe 5 hours, maybe if it's over a shift. We did not get a straight answer from Michigan. So something to keep in mind. Number 4, any substance to the extent it's used in a research laboratory or hospital. Those are specific though, and it has to be under the direct supervision of a technically qualified individual. So if you have like a QC lab or something that people just kind of come and go from, and there isn't anybody in charge of the lab, then that does need to be included as part of your tier 2 evaluation. And then any substance to the extent is used in routine agricultural operations or fertilizer held for sale by a retailer to the ultimate customer. That's regulated under other things, so not part of tier 2. There are special reporting conditions for retail gasoline stations. We don't work a lot with those, so I'm not including them here, but if you have them, if you are in charge of retail gasoline stations, then those can be found. So reporting rules. Note. Most agencies prefer you report the full material instead of the individual chemical. So where this might come into play, maybe you have hydraulic oil in, in machine reservoirs. You've also got some in your elevator, the elevator equipment. Maybe you have some in dock loaders as well, dock leveling equipment. You don't need to report each one of those separately. So you're not reporting like whey oil and lube oil and hydraulic oil, not reporting those separately. You can just say oils and then give the amount you have in sump, the aggregated amount. If you have, in some cases, some of those things will have then might have an extremely hazardous substance in them. In that case, you would either pull that item out because you're crossing the threshold of the EHS, you might pull that material out and report the material. Again, you're not reporting just the EHS inside of it. So if you have, I'm actually going to bring up citric acid in a bit, so we'll use that as an example. We have a client that uses citric acid, and it is 10% of that has nitric acid. So we don't report just the 10% that's nitric acid. We report the citric acid and then say in the components, 10% of it is nitric acid. Let's see. Yeah, you can see the example there. The amount of an extremely hazardous substance at a facility, whether pure or in mixtures, has to be added together. So if you cross a reporting threshold for a 500-gallon tank of sulfuric acid, you also have to report all of the fork truck batteries that are not car batteries. Because you've already crossed for sulfuric acid, you have to report sulfuric acid wherever it is inside of your building. And then, as I mentioned, similar materials with similar hazards can be combined and reported. So if you're doing, maybe you're doing painting operations and you have water-based paints and solvent-based paints, you might do those as different things because those have different hazards. So one line would be water-based paint and the next line would be solvent-based paint. Reporting platforms. We talked about this earlier, but Tier 2 reporting is a federal requirement that is implemented by the state. Each state gets to make the decision for how to get their data. So there are some common reporting platforms. Tier 2 Submit is one of them. That's the EPA's format. ePlan is another. Tier 2 Manager has Connect. That's the same thing. Same program. Tier 2 Manager is what we use in Michigan. Indiana calls it Has Connect. Okay. Lots of states are using that one. Actually, more and more states are switching to this one. And then there's a bunch of state-specific platforms. So this is a look at the federal requirement. This is what the federal Tier 2 report has to include. But remember, there's not a single state that uses this. Okay? Nobody allows the submittal of paper anymore, and nobody uses the EPA's paper format. So EPA has published software called Tier 2 Submit. You have to download it new each year because they make changes. So you go to the EPA's website and download Tier 2 Submit. You can import the previous year's report and it pulls all that data in. This report, it's kind of small, but you can see here the state of the material, solid, liquid, or gas. You can pick multiple. So, if you had a compressed gas, you probably have liquid and gas. The amount in pounds, is there a trade secret? And then this is how much your max storage, your average storage, and then there's always a max amount in the largest container. Some states require that information. Many states don't. It's just nice for them to have. All states will also have something that's a below reporting threshold, so you just would check that box then. And that's how you're saying we are voluntarily submitting this information. Each state will have the physical hazards list and the health hazards list. And then you also have the breakdown of the extremely hazardous substance. So what CAS numbers are in the material and what is the concentration there. And then this bottom part, actually that's this part here with the mixture components. And then this part is how much is stored in each location, okay? Sometimes Tier 2 submit can be used. Some states will use that information you're submitting the report to the SERC, but they may provide that directly to the LEPC and the fire department. They might report it to only one of them. It really depends on the state and often the county and, in fact, fire department. We'll talk about jurisdictions more in a bit. But I do want to point out Tier 2 submit is used in Ohio and a bunch of other states. This is E-Plan, generally used in the southeast of the U.S. So Georgia, Florida, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee. Weirdly, Iowa also uses it. They're kind of a little island of E-Plan use in the middle of the country. Similar to the other form, to the Tier 2 submit that we just looked at, but E-Plan is an online thing. So you log in, the data is there. When you log in, you click a button that says, I want to import last year's report, and then it will fill everything from last year into this year's report. And you just make the updates that you need to make. Again, this could satisfy LEPC and fire department. Certainly it will do the SERC. Okay, Has Connect or Tier 2 manager. This one has been, as I said, an increasing number of states are using it. This is used in Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, Connecticut just started using it last year. North Dakota uses this now. Lots of states use Tier 2 manager. I find this to be the easiest one to use, but you don't get to pick. You just have to do the one the state has. Tier 2 manager is an interesting thing because you only get one login for each site. So if you're using a consultant, sometimes that means your information is going to live on the consultant's login. Actually, Michigan prefers that because then they don't have to pay for as many logins. So I think I have like 25 or 30 sites on my login. And then, the clients never get to see that, but we have that, one place to go to get everything added in. The thing with that is then what happens is we would, we'll do the calculations, prepare the report, send it to the clients for review. They, reply back, yes, this looks good, or I have questions. If it looks good, then they say, please submit on our behalf. And then we log in and submit, but using the client's name because we have their approval to do that. So that's a common way in Michigan. As I said, Tier 2 managers, really the easiest to follow, I think, and easy. It's the most intuitive. So there's specific requirements, specific sections. You just answer each section. It walks you through everything. Yeah, and you can see here, this is the chemical description page of the report. So here's the list of chemicals. You don't click on here. If you click on the chemical name, then that just brings you to a static display. So what you would do is click on edit. Then that brings you to the chemical description. You put in the information, including if it's pure or a mixture. If it's a mixture, then you put in what's in it. You're only required to list the extremely hazardous substances that are in it. So you don't have to do it. It doesn't have to equal 100%. But Yeah, you can do that however you want, but you do have to list the extremely hazardous substances. And then the next tab of that, inventory and storage. So when you're done with that, you would hit save, and that brings you over to inventory and storage. And there you put in the amounts that are on site, the maximum amount in the largest container if you want to do that. And then you also are picking what vessel, what the container type is. So in this case, it is a tank inside a building. There's also AST, UST, box, bag, plastic drum. I think it's actually metal drum and then non-metallic drum. There's some states, including Michigan now, also have a battery there. Okay. Oh, you know what? Let me go back to this a minute. When you log into the Michigan system, after you log in, the first screen that pops up, it gives the list of counties that also have access to this. So I haven't looked yet this year, but Ottawa County, Kent County are listed. They are in cooperation with the state's Tier 2 manager. So if you are in Ottawa County or Kent County, the LEPC and the fire department are getting their information from your submittal to the state. Allegan County, Muskegon County are not. So you would then have to, you go on to Eagle's website, get the email address of the LEPC, contact the fire department. We'll talk more about jurisdiction in a bit, but just be aware when you log in, the first screen they're going to show you is the list of counties that are participating. So use that information and save yourself some time if you can. Okay, then there's a lot of state-specific platforms. I have highlighted in red here the ones that have lower thresholds. So these are all the states that have their own reporting platform, although Arizona just changed theirs and it's starting to look a bit more like Tier 2 manager. It is still their own sort of thing. I'll talk about California in a bit when we get to the bottom part of the slide, but Louisiana has a threshold of 500 pounds. So if you have a drum of oil on site, odds are pretty good you're going to be, pretty close to 500 pounds on that, 2 drums of oil. And then you've tripped the threshold for reporting oil in Louisiana. New Jersey, you have to include hazardous waste. So again, remember this is what's on site, right? What's there as an average and as a max. So your max might be when your hazardous waste storage area is full. And you would then include that as your max and then average that out by 365 days. Maybe your hazardous waste storage area is only full one time a year, and it's only full for 5 days, let's say, before you get everything taken off site. Then you would take 5 and divide that by 365 for the average on site. Okay. Okay. California. They have different reporting thresholds. They have their own reporting system. You have to actually, it's done through SERS, California Environmental Reporting System. And you have to include their Tier 2 actually has a different name. It's called the HMBP, Hazardous Materials Business Plan. You have to include the hazardous materials inventory as part of that. That's really the Tier 2 information, chemical storage information. But they have much lower thresholds and they have a different list of reportable materials. They don't have a consumer product exemption. You also have to include the business information and a site plan and an update on when you most recently trained your staff on responding to emergencies. California, no consumer product exemption, which is where we run into tobacco having to be listed in your report because of the nicotine that's in it. So. And the due date changes there. The CUPA is the California Unified something or other. That is essentially at the county level. Some counties have March 1 as the due date, but a lot of counties have it as the due date is 365 days from when you previously submitted the report. So if you're not careful, you can end up shifting your reporting from, if you launch your facility in June, your initial report would probably be in June. the next year, if you get that report filed earlier in May, then it's possible that the next year's report would be due in May. But some of the counties actually say it's 365 days plus however many years from when you submitted the first one. Best to take the time to figure that stuff out before you run into a non-compliance notification from them. That's what they do. They send out a non-compliance, you're 5 days late on your report and you have 30 days to get it in, that sort of thing. Okay, let's look at tier 2 fees now. Some states don't have fees. Michigan is one of them. In fact, Michigan's tier 2 site has said, and I haven't looked at it yet this year. Michigan's tier 2 site says the best things in life are free and your tier 2 report is one of them. It's hilarious to me that they are so proud of not charging fees. It's very convenient for us. ePlan, if that's what you have to use for your non-Michigan sites, charges $25 per site. And that's a fee to ePlan. Additionally, some states have fees. So in Florida, you have to pay $10 per employee. So in Florida, really, if you've got a bunch of sites there, it really is in your best interest to combine those reports. So on one login. So you'll have all of your facilities as a different report, but all on one login. That's going to then add up all of your employees. They have a 200 employee cap. So a $2,000 cap. If you've got, 50 employees at 4 facilities, you're going to hit that cap. So if you've got 50 employees at 10 facilities, use them all on one login so you can hit that cap and not have to pay for all of your employees everywhere. Some states set the fee per site with a cap. Maryland, I think, has a $1,750 cap or something like that. Some states have a specific amount for a non-extremely hazardous substance and a different amount for extremely hazardous substance. Ohio is like that. So Ohio EPA actually sends out a worksheet invoice that just lists out what you had on your previous year's reporting. And then when you do this year's reporting, you go back and change that if needed. So last year we had 3 extremely hazardous substances, and this year we only have 2. And that can make a pretty big difference on your fee. Let's see, some states it's based on the quantity on site. The state of Nevada. Yes. Nevada has a per, based on how much you have on site. We did work for a company with a lot of fork truck batteries, and they so many fork truck batteries. They were more than 500,000 pounds of fork truck batteries, and those contain sulfuric acid. And their fee just for those batteries was $7,500. No cap in Nevada. Let's see, payment of fees. Quite often they're payable online as part of the submission process, but then usually there's a convenience fee. So if you are in Indiana, it's $100 per site. If you pay online with a credit card, there's a $2 and 2.5% convenience fee. So you would pay $102.50. Some states like Ohio, which I mentioned, send their invoice early, and you have to pay that. You have to revise that invoice to match this year's report before you pay it. So you have an extra month to get the invoice in, to get the payment in Ohio. Some states send an invoice later. We do, as was mentioned earlier, we do enterprise level reporting for a lot of clients. We just got some fees that were sent to sites this past December from last year's tier 2 reporting. So let's see. Okay, jurisdiction review. Tier 2 reports have to be submitted to the SERC, the LEPC, and the fire department. As I mentioned, some states, some SERCs share the data with the LEPC and the fire department. Check the SERC's website and elsewhere. As I mentioned, Michigan has the list by county. If the data is not shared, the LEPC should be on the tier 2 report and the fire department. If it's a brand new facility, you're going to want to figure out who is the LEPC for our county. In Kent County, it's run by the Kent County Sheriff's Office. So if you're in Grand Rapids, if you're in Sparta, doesn't matter, wherever you are, it's through the Kent County Sheriff's Office. Ottawa County has, I think it's through the Sheriff's Office there as well. So just figure out where that is. And if you're in a big facility, in a big city, so if you're in Detroit or something, or you have a facility, I think it was St. Louis, Missouri, has like 5 different fire departments in their metropolitan area. So you have to know which fire department is going to respond to you. Usually it's the closest, but not always. You know, sometimes you can be, I mean, in Grand Rapids, you could be on the border between Wyoming and Grand Rapids, and the Grand Rapids Fire Department is going to come even if the Wyoming Fire Department is closer. You need to contact them to figure out their preference. So if you know the state is sharing, so Michigan is sharing with Kent County, if you're in Wyoming, Michigan, or Grand Rapids, Michigan, that's going to get to the correct fire department. In other places, though, you will need to send it to them. Call and find out how they want it. You can email as well. And it's hard to say which one's going to be more likely to get a response. But find out every year. We have had some counties, I think Muskegon County for a while, the Muskegon Fire Department wanted it via email, and then they reverted back and actually wanted it via mail when they got a new fire marshal. So just always, our recommendation is to check every year. Some people will want it by email, others want a hard copy by mail. We had one fire department in Louisiana that wanted it hand delivered, and we were just extremely lucky that one of the employees had a cousin who lived near that fire department, and we were able to get they sent the report to their cousin who printed it and then hand delivered it to that very rural fire department in Louisiana. Be aware, there are many different ways to submit data. Email, but what do they want emailed? Do they want a PDF? If it's in a state that uses Tier 2 Submit, they may want you to send the T2S file, which is an export from Tier 2 Submit. Some fire departments and counties will want that T2S file, even though the state has moved away from Tier 2 Submit and now uses Tier 2 Manager. So in those places, you're filing the report twice, essentially. You're doing the report in Tier 2 Manager to submit it to the state. Then you're doing the report in Tier 2 Submit to get it to the fire department or the county. Sometimes they want a PDF that's been hand signed, and then maybe they will accept that via email, scanned. But in a lot of cases, then if they want it hand signed, they want it hand delivered or sent through mail, so they have the hard copy with the wet signature. Some have their own system. In Berks County, Pennsylvania, you're going to do Tier 2 Manager for PATS for the Pennsylvania system, but you're also going to do a separate Tier 2 Manager for Berks County. I don't know why, but there you go. The city of Baton Rouge, Louisiana has their own system just for the city of Louisiana or Baton Rouge. Okay, looking at penalties and fines. These are assessed based on nature, extent, gravity, and circumstances of the violation. They are included in the EPCRA fines, and these sorts of fines are increased every year for inflation. Those numbers were just released a few weeks ago, $71,545 per violation. Actual regulatory language is per day per violation, but EPA pretty much always just gives you we're not actually going to charge you per year. You're cooperating. We're going to drop that, we're not going to actually charge you per day. We're going to drop that because you've been cooperating with us. We will only charge you the fee per year. So often there's state penalties. Remember, EPCRA is a federal program. So even though the report doesn't go to the EPA, they can issue fines for it if you have not been filing it. More likely you're going to see the state reach out and potentially with penalties or non-compliance notification, that sort of thing. Some states where there's a fee will have late fees. The late submission penalty of between 10 and 30 days can often be assessed fines up to $12,000 with a minimum of $25,000 after a 30-day delay. I've not seen that happen for Tier 2 reporting. Usually there's a lot more grace with this because it is a state program, but again, you do need to make sure you're getting it done. And then there's penalties if you submit your fee late. In the state of Wisconsin, fees have to be paid by the March 1 deadline. And if you are later than that, there's a 25% late fee. We have a company that we work with. The client has a bunch of facilities in Wisconsin and ended up with a $40,000 tier 2 fees for all of the sites that they reported. And we did not have a single person who could put that on their credit card. Probably not a big surprise. That's a lot of money. But if we did not get a check cut in time and submitted in time, then there would be an additional 25% on top of that, which is pretty significant. So make sure you're aware of that. Make sure you're paying the fees on time. Failure to file, you can see a couple examples that I have there. Generally, fines increase based on severity of the violation. EPA does have a penalty calculation guidance, but you have to really know the regulation in order to be able to figure out what they're trying to tell you. Okay, that's the end of tier 2. So if you have questions, please do put them in the chat. We'll come to them shortly. I do want to make sure we cover the air stuff, and then I think we'll have plenty of time for questions. So air emissions reporting. You can see here, user guide, annual equipment inventory, and annual emissions reporting. That is a link. I will get the slides to Zach so they can get them out to everybody. This is borrowed heavily from Eagle's guidance. They just moved to this new system last year was the first year. So we don't, and the way the new system is set up, with screenshots, you're almost always getting client-specific information. So I didn't want to share any of that with you. I have instead got screenshots, captured screenshots from Eagle's guidance, and then that's what we're going to look at. So MiEnviro. Hopefully you are familiar with MiEnviro. It used to be called MiWaters, and it was used by Eagle's water program. So stormwater permits were there, permit applications, wastewater, any NPDES stuff was there, including like narcotic cooling water. Any of those permits have been, you've been having to submit the application in MiWaters for quite a number of years now. That was pre-COVID, so it's been at least 5 or 6 years. Additionally, you had to do like annual reporting, DMRs, that sort of thing there as well. When they brought the air system in, they changed the name from MiWaters to MiEnviro. So MiEnviro is where you'll go. When you log in, if you have a stormwater or wastewater permit and an air emissions report that you have to do, or air permits, you're going to have 2 different things there. So you can see here, this is the sample list of sites. In this case, if this Haywood site had both water and air permits, it would be listed twice. You would have Haywood test site, maybe with their NPDES number, and then Haywood test site with their air SRN. Okay, so like N and then 4 numbers or whatever it is. Also, when you come to this login, the first thing you're going to land on is a dashboard screen, and that's going to tell you what fees are due. And if you log in right now, you should see, if you have a stormwater permit, there's a $260 stormwater permit fee that is due. They issued those invoices last week. If you have fees for your air emissions, and odds are good if you're submitting an air emissions report, you do have some fees. Those range from $250 to like $25,000, depending on what sector your business is in and how many emissions you have. So that also is going to be listed there. So when you log in, if you are only connected with one site, you might still have 2 there, and it'll show all of the fees that are due. They're all due now. So the air emissions fees, I think, were posted like 3 weeks ago, and they just simply say due now. So you can pay all of that online. It's very convenient, but make sure they get paid. If they are a month late, they start racking up late fees. Okay, so when you log in, you're going to see it's a big screen, and off on the left corner of the screen. So when you log in on the left corner of the screen, you're going to see this all and the list of sites. You need to pick the one that you want. So if you are doing your air emissions stuff, you need to pick the site listing that has the SRN. That's how you're going to get to the facility that you want. So when you do that, it's going to give you, it will pick Once you pick the site, it's going to give you a dashboard that tells you which reports are ready for you. So as you can see on this one, this is a shot from last year. So you can see the annual equipment inventory was due at that time. The inventory review was, but the emissions report was not available yet because it doesn't open until January 2. It is now open. So when you log in, this should not show up because you will have already submitted it. As you can see, it was due on November 1. But this one should now say begin, or it may say continue draft or something like that. Let's see, the equipment inventory. So this is the equipment inventory review, the EIR, is used by Eagle to help them update the master facility inventory, the MFI. You don't get to make changes directly into the MFI. Only Eagle has access to that. What you do is give them the information that you have for your site, and then that gets uploaded into the MFI by the state. So when you submit the equipment inventory review, you may very well get some questions back from Eagle, like, hey, this is something new. We have some questions here. Or in looking at this, we have a question about this. Okay. The EIR includes the facility information, the release points, the control devices, control paths, emission units, and then the processes. And the processes are where the SCCs get determined. So you have to make sure you are updating every one of those. Each of these icons is called a tile. I'm not going to spend, so the EIR was due in the fall. In 2023, it was due by December 1. That may have been because it was the first year and they wanted people to have a bit more time. They did launch the program kind of late in 2023. Last year, it was due by November 1, and we kind of think it's going to be November 1 going forward, but we just don't have enough history with this yet to know for sure when that's due. Depending on what happens at your facility, that first year may have been kind of a doozy because MERS did not have everything that the EPA needed it to have, which is why we've switched to this SLEIS, it's called. But with that transition from MERS to SLEIS, there was a lot of extra stuff we had to do. That has been done. So if your facility doesn't have a lot of changes, then the EIR might be very quick to do each year. But if you do have changes, you have to go through, you have to make sure you've got the right SCC for that new operation or new process. You have to make sure you have the emission units correct, make sure you're updating all of the tiles. If you have to make changes after the EIR due date, then you access the EIR, again, through MiEnviro, which is going to bring you into SLEIS, make the changes, and then submit. And then Eagle will get notification that you changed things on the EIR, and they're going to make those changes into the MFI. You will then get an email notification that it's ready. Until you get that email notification, you can't actually log in to do the annual emissions report. So check your stuff soon. It's due on March 15. Eagle's staff they do not bulk up a lot for air emissions reporting time. So there's a lot of people who are contacting them, and they will be slower. They may have some additional staff, but they do not like triple their staff just for air emissions reporting season. So my recommendation is that you check, make sure everything is accurate. You might do that by accessing your report, which will go to the annual emissions report, and see what's there, see if you have any changes. Make those changes soon because the deadline is only about 5.5 weeks away. So if you do make changes, you get that notification from Eagle that they've made the update and your MFI is updated. And then you can go back into MiEnviro, into SLEIS, and pick the annual emissions report. And then you have to click resync, which will bring the MFI changes into your annual emissions report. I'm not going to spend more time on the EIR because it was due back in November, so it's not going to help you right now anyway. The air emissions report topic divider that we looked at earlier includes a link to the training, and that goes much more in depth. In fact, more than half of the training they have is on the EIR. Okay, so looking at the annual emissions report. This includes view-only tiles for this top line. None of these are changeable. So you can click on them and it will bring you to your information, but you cannot make changes there. Remember, if you make changes, you need changes, you have to go back through the EIR to do those. The only things you can really access here are the process emissions and the attachments. A note on import data. So you can download the template, which is, it's a file that you'll use in Excel. It's actually a CSV. So you would then, there's actually 3 of them that you would have to do. And then you can make those and then you can upload them, import them. You can do that, but Eagle does not recommend this approach. The way SLEIS is set up, there's data validation. So every time you enter data into a field, when you tab out of that field, it's going to review to see if what you've put there is appropriate. So if you like type into a number field, it's going to say numbers only or something like that. The Excel bringing in the import from with the CSV file does not do that. So you won't know that your data is entered correctly. You won't know that what you've entered is valid, and you don't know if Eagle will accept it. If you submit something on March 14 or March 15 and Eagle gets back to you, a week later and says this is wrong, then your final submission of that report will be after the due date, which can be a problem with the state. They're generally fairly lenient about that, but it can be a bigger problem if you're ISO certified. So make sure you're getting things done early enough that there's time to fix if you need to. Aside from that, we follow the state's recommendation and do not recommend importing data. Enter it directly through the tiles. That's the best way to make sure you're getting everything done correctly. Okay, so process emissions. When you click on, I'm going to go back. When you click on process emissions, it's going to bring you to this window, which lists out all of your emissions. When you get here, you can see, you could click on, like this is a link, right? But if you click on this, it just opens up a static thing, okay? In order to actually make any edits, you need to come over here and click on the little gear symbol, okay? That is gonna open up this tab, this screen, which has 3 tabs: process, operations, and emissions. This is where you can make edits, but you can only edit the things that are available to edit. So if you get here and the throughput units of measure are not what you were expecting, that may be because your SCC is wrong. So throughput units of measure is dependent upon SCC. If your SCC is not right, then you need to go back to your emissions inventory review, make the update, submit it to Eagle. They make the update on the MFI, and then they'll email you and tell you that it's ready for you to then resync and bring this back in so you can keep going. So again, get started early. So the process tab is where the throughput informations go. Make sure you've got the right units. Don't put in throughput in pounds if it requires tons. It will be a lot more emissions than you want, right? A lot more emissions than you actually have. The next tab here is the operations tab. So you can go through these by clicking on next and previous. If you want to go back out to the full list, you're going to click on this back button. There is not a screenshot of the operations tab, so I'm just going to tell you what's on there. It includes operation information, not surprisingly, right? That includes hours, days, weeks, and that seasonal breakdown we had to do back in MARES. Remember, winter, spring, summer, fall. The winter months are January and February of 2024, and then all the way through the year to December of 2024. So don't do December of 23 and January, February of 24, because that's what feels like it should be the winter, right? But 2023 emissions have been reported and should not be reported for this year. So January 24, February of 2024, all the way around to December of 24, that gets grouped together in that winter seasonal breakdown. Okay, there is a screenshot of the emissions tab. I think they didn't do a screenshot of the operations one because it's really boring. Maybe. I'm sure the rest of this is raw excitement for you. So this tab, the emissions tab, pre-populates with the pollutants. You can see them here, PM 2.5, PM 10, and VOC. Pre-populates with the pollutants and calculation method right here from the previous year. You click on the arrow. So this little arrow, which is sideways here, is down here because this is the one that's clicked on for this example. So you click on the arrow to expand the pollutant and update the information. If you need to add, you can click the add button down here. If you are going to have the software calculate things for you, so where you have throughput, remember that was entered back on the process tab, and then here you have the emission factor, pounds per unit, then you can have the software calculate for you. And then you can just click calculate all, and it will calculate all of this. It's going to actually calculate everything. Okay. If you want to do their calculation only for the pollutant that you're on, then you actually click on the calculator here. If you don't want this, if if this is the wrong one, it shouldn't be here. If instead of PM 2.5 filterable, you need PM 2.5 condensable, then you would need to hit delete and then add PM 2.5 condensable. Okay. Let's see. If you use the back button here, that's going to go back out to the emission units list. Use previous to go to the previous screen, so to operations or process. And if you click next here, that's going to actually bring you to the next pollutant on the screen. Okay, so on this tab, so you walked through, you reviewed all this stuff, made sure it was correct. You did all of your emissions, and you uploaded your attachments for where you have to upload things for where you're doing calculations and not using the software to calculate. You need to upload those files. We usually do that in Excel where we've got the calculations, and then we will just PDF that. So we upload the PDF. Then you have to, the next step is to click on validate down here in the corner. You can see here it says in process. Once you click on validate, it will go through and check all of your errors. So if you have errors there, it's going to find them. The first time you hit validate, you might end up with these are the things that don't pass. And you have to go back and fix each one of them. And once you have passed everything, so get a screenshot of the list or go through it, and then or you can go back to the validation. It's going to actually, I think it includes a link to the screen that needs your attention. Once you hit validate and everything is fine, then you will get this screen that says in process validated. No errors were encountered while validating your report. At this point, you need to mark it as ready for submission. If you are not the certifier, so if you are the preparer, but somebody else is doing the certification, then you would mark this as ready for submission, and then you would log out and you're done. If you, that's going to send a notification to the certifier. If you are the certifier, then what it's going to do is bring you back to this screen, and you can click initiate submission. If you are the preparer and you need to help the certifier walk through how they're doing the submittal, then the submitter logs in through MiEnviro. They click on My Facilities, and then it will display all of the facilities for that login, and it will display which one has an active report. I think there it will say something like ready for submission. So when they click on that, then they'll come to this screen. You'll see in process, ready for submission. And then what they need to do is click initiate submission, which brings this screen. I'm walking through this carefully because you have to do each one of these things or it will not work. So the first thing you do on this screen, you have to view the electronic document. You don't get to not look at it. So you have to view it. Our recommendation is then that you just save a copy. It's going to open as a PDF. Save a copy of that PDF so you have it in your files. And that way, if something happens to MiEnviro or SLEIS, you have your data. If, an air regulator comes by and says, I'd like to see your air emissions report, then you have it as a PDF and you don't need to log in and make sure that you have them looking at your screen while you're doing all of that. Maybe a bit undesirable. Okay, so when you look at the electronic document, then this continue button will open up. Okay, you can see cancel is available to click on, but continue is not. So when you click on continue, then there will be a number of certification statements. I can't remember if it's 3 or 5. I'm not a certifier, so I don't actually get to see those other than when I'm walking a client through it. You need to check the box for each one of them. So you will have agreed with each, you have to agree with each statement individually. Once all of the boxes are checked, then it will pop up with a security question and you'll need to enter the password. Eagle specifically calls out that if your browser automatically fills that information in, you have to delete it. Eagle says that the security question and the password have to be entered manually. Once you've done that, then you click continue, and then you have to click view official copy of record, and that might actually be the one you want to keep record of, and then you can click done. You are not done with the Air Emissions report until you have clicked the done button. Okay. So I talked more quickly than I thought I would, and we're at the questions time. So I'm gonna stop sharing for right now, and we'll open the floor for questions. Okay, combustible metals. Yeah, if they have a hazard, you do have to include them. So Vincent, if you have combustible metals on site, they would need to be included on your tier 2 report. And even if that is, you think how I would do that. So for plastic pellets, we actually put combustible dust as part of that. The safety data sheet should call out what the hazards are, but I would expect those to, combustible metals, I would expect that you would, I think combustible is only going to show up with dust. So you would then either click combustible dust, and you might click that anyway, or you would click flammable, or there's also a physical hazards not otherwise classified, so PNOC. There's also health hazards not otherwise classified, HNOC. There's also in some states that just gets combined to HNOC, which is just hazard not otherwise classified. So put it in there. And there's usually a comment section where you could just add some additional information on that. Okay. Any other questions? You guys can come off mute. I don't need to be the only person talking.
Yes, Sarah, I have a question.
Yeah.
So should you be updating the tier 2 report throughout the year if you have quantity changes or new chemicals brought on site, or should I wait till the next reporting year?
Yeah. In compliance with the regulation, you should make the update when it happens. In Michigan, you are going to log back into the tier 2 system, and instead of doing an annual report, you will do an update. That update will show up as this year. So let's say you file this year's, you file the 2024 tier 2 report that's going to be completed. Then when you do an update, it's going to show up as a 2025 update because you're updating in the calendar year of 2025. Update the report and update it as needed across all of the, any updates that you have over the year. And then you will still need to do your 2025 reporting year tier 2 report before March 1 of 2026. I mean, it might be super simple because you would have already caught all of that. But yeah, the regulation reads that if you have contact information, so if you have a change in staff, change in phone number or email addresses, that needs to be updated in the system. If you had like 15,000 pounds of oil and now you've got 15,100 pounds of oil, to the letter of the law, you should do that, update that. I know a lot of people wouldn't. A lot of our clients generally are like, well, it wasn't super significant. And I don't expect that you would get pinged on that, where the state agency would call out that you hadn't done it. So long answer to your short question. And the short answer, if you were TLDR on that, the short answer is yes, you should. But again, you're probably not going to get in a huge amount of trouble if you don't, as long as it's not something like a new chemical. You should definitely. A new extremely hazardous substance, 100% you should update that. But if it's a slight fluctuation in quantity, then I probably wouldn't.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you, Sarah. Another question for you. Are fire departments required to review tier 2 reports that they get submitted to them on an annual basis, or is that not even a requirement for them?
I don't actually know what the requirement is. In the counties that Michigan, where the SERC is providing the information, that actually, like Kent County Fire Department, Ottawa County Fire Department, they actually can pull up your tier 2 report in their truck on their way to your facility. I think most of the counties, most of the fire departments are reviewing. Remember what they're using this for, right? This is to keep their people from getting hurt when they respond to your facility. If they've not seen your facility before, they don't know what you're doing there. They are going to look at that. It is the best way for them to keep their people safe, is to make sure they have the equipment that they need to be safe. And they can't plan on that if they don't know what you're doing. So my gut feeling is that it is a requirement, but they would be doing it anyway. So I have had a client who reported, they were in Oakland County, and they reported to the SERC, and Oakland County does share with the fire department. And then they got an email from the fire department that said, you have to also fill out our report, which was just a 1-page, like, tell us a little bit more about these things. Do you have any of these things you might not have thought of, but are like trigger words kind of for the fire department? And so I have seen documentation that they do review them. It may not be in March, but I do think they are pretty conscientious about that.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you. I have one more question for you. So, I have lots of clients with forklifts. So if they have literally over 2 or more forklifts, they should be submitting a tier 2 report.
So yeah, fork truck. It depends on the battery. If they are propane powered, then they're going to be, the only battery they're going to have is a car battery. So you don't have to do anything with that. Propane combustion inside a facility starts to get pretty noxious. So a lot of companies are moving away from that to electric powered industrial trucks. Remember this, it could be even just an electric pallet jack, right? Those will have a battery. That's usually not a car battery. It's usually some sort of industrial battery. So yeah, the state, back when we were using the old tier 2 system, the state had kind of it was published by Susan Parker, and that will date my knowledge, because she retired more than a decade ago, I believe. She had documentation or guidance that was, if you don't have a safety data sheet for your fork truck batteries, then assume that 1/3 of the weight is electrolyte, and assume 30% of the weight is electrolyte and 66% of the battery weight is lead. Of that 30%, 1/3 of it is sulfuric acid. So it works out to 11% sulfuric acid. And then, 4,750 pounds of battery, and you hit that 500-pound limit. So for your clients then, Zach, I would ask which of these batteries are lead acid, because lithium batteries have a 10,000-pound limit. Okay. So make sure you know what they are. And you have to ask about other batteries as well. We have a lot of clients who will have like a server room or something. If you've got a server room, you probably have uninterruptible power supplies. Some of those, the uninterruptible power supply will have batteries in it. Some of those will be lead acid. Some of them might be lithium. You have to make sure you're adding it all together. Batteries you don't need to add in are anything that meets the consumer product exemption. So if you have like handheld scanners that are just powered by, like a DeWalt type of plug-in battery, or you have maintenance has electric drills or screwdrivers or whatever, you don't need to include those batteries. We have some clients who are like, here are all my batteries, and we end up with like 10,000 AA batteries, and like, okay, only California cares about that. The rest of the nation does not. So make sure you're, being direct with what you're asking for. Lead acid batteries that are not publicly available. And do you have any, any computer server batteries that we need to include? And what do you have that's a lithium battery? Another thing to consider, some companies are using hydrogen powered batteries with the fuel cell, or hydrogen powered fork trucks with a fuel cell. Quite often that's going to be a hydrogen tank outside, and then piping and a riser system into wherever they're refueling the fuel cells. That hydrogen needs to be included. Interestingly, ammonia, 500-pound threshold, hydrogen, 10,000-pound threshold. So, make sure you're looking at the list to see what the threshold is, but also make sure you're looking at what that is. A lot of companies are intentionally designing that system to be just under 10,000 pounds. So we actually have a number of clients with that sort of setup that is like 9,930 pounds of hydrogen at maximum. So, make sure you know that information. And again, in Michigan, there's no fee for reporting. There's no fee for having an extra line item. It's not a bad idea to say to the fire department, hey, we have a hydrogen tank on site and we're using hydrogen to power our fork trucks. And you could do that with a line item, hydrogen. You've got a tank probably outside, so an AST. You've got piping, I think, is one of the things that you can select. And then you would also put other and then say something like powered industrial trucks or something like that. Add them all up, they equal less than 10,000 pounds. So you would check reporting below threshold. Okay.
But it's still best practice to report it to let the firefighters and first responders
It
know.
really is. Yeah, it really is. I just keep going back to, I've been doing this for so long and I keep going back to, if I were a firefighter, would I want to know? You're darn straight I'd want to know. If I'm going to walk into a facility that has a hydrogen tank, I want to know that. Even if it's just 500 pounds. I sure as heck want to know if it's almost 10,000 pounds. We need to know so we can keep people safe. And that's really what you guys are all doing anyway. So think it through. Would I want to know? Yes, I would. Then I usually include it. And that's why we've got a number of clients that are including plastic pellets. So.
Awesome. Well, I heard you mention propane powered forklifts. Is the reporting threshold for propane 10,000 pounds?
It is, yeah. Yeah. So, if you've got a bunch of little tanks, you're just not going to get there. But some companies will have propane for heat, in which case that 10,000 pound happens pretty quickly, depending on size of the building and size of the tank.
Awesome. Well, Sarah, I don't know if there's any more questions. Does anyone else have any last minute questions? I see Ryan put something in the chat saying, are we able to make those slides available? Sarah, are you able to send me those?
I will send you the slides, and I saw that you're recording. So will your recording also be posted then?
Yep. So the recording will be posted to our West Michigan ASSP website, so you're able to view this presentation as a whole. But if you'd like the specific slides, those can also be sent out. But if there are not any other questions, Sarah, thank you for a great presentation. It was very informative, especially if you've never submitted one of these reports before. And if you have, it was a great refresher. So thank you so much for that. And I hope to see everyone at our next meeting in March. Oh, looks like
sorry,
Eric has a question.
Oh, Eric,
Yep.
maybe you were just saying thank you. I will just say, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I did not share my contact information. Let me just do that really quickly. And I'm going to share my screen again here, and we'll go to the next screen there. So here's my contact information, and feel free to reach out. Katie Dratz, as I mentioned, is one of your members. You can reach out to her as well. We're happy to help. Time is getting short on the tier 2. We've got about 3.5 weeks left. And about 5.5 weeks left on the area missions report. So, oh yeah, no, that's right. 3.5 and 5.5. Yes. So anyway, best of luck, and reach out if you have any questions.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you everyone for your time this morning, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Are any of the rest of you on because you have questions? Okay, thank you.